We are summarizing all of the decision-making process that we've talked about within the course so far in this video. And it is titled, What Type of Rubric Do You Want to Use? And in it, we will be talking about how to match your assessment or assignment type of what you are creating for your students to do to demonstrate their learning to the type of rubric that would be best to measure that learning. And so we're really just summarizing the types of rubrics that we've talked about. So the first kind we talked about were checklists and rating scales. They aren't rubrics, remember, but they are in the family. They would be best to actually include as part of the instructions for an assignment and make them as the requirement within the instructions. And so they actually require some thorough thought to create your checklists and your rating scales and the planning process of establishing your assignments throughout your course. This is mainly because they affect what you will and will not include in the writing of your rubrics once you get to the rubric portion of creating your assignment. This topic may actually impact your thoughts considerably on what your rubrics will measure. If you establish some ground rules for your differing types of assignments, then there's no need to include these types of things in each of your rubrics, but again, they would instead be included as part of the instructions for the assignment. These things might include such items as neatness, spelling, grammar, formatting, like your font size, what font you choose, size, spacing, MLA, APA, those kinds of things, numbers of specific things to include, etc. So those are all okay within a checklist or a rating scale, but we don't necessarily want to include those, at least not in our general rubrics. As an example, let's say that we have a poster presentation project, and here's our checklist. So my poster has to have 6 facts, has to have a picture related to each fact, it has to be neat, and uses correct grammar. Well, this is definitely a checklist item and not a rubric. And so this needs to be included with the assignment submission in terms of what they need to include, but not an evaluative rubric on the quality of learning taking place. This does not demonstrate learning. It just means they can check items off of a list and include these things in their poster. These things can also be more closely resembling a rubric just because they might be created as a table, and even with a kind of a rating scale within that table. But really, this example here, even though it says a grading rubric at the top, this is a bad example of a general rubric at least. This is a checklist in the form of a rubric. You know, the quantity, how many slides you have, the quality of slides, maybe that could be generalized a little bit, how long the presentation is, 4 to 7 minutes, the content of the presentation, do you explain what you're supposed to in your presentation, and then just the methodology of your presentation. And so that's not really what we're shooting for. There's nothing in there that would correlate to a standard or an objective for learning about the stock market. And so this is a checklist and not a rubric. And so as we go through this and we look at these items with more scrutiny, there's not much measuring going on here. Again, about a learning objective or trying to hit a standard or anything like that. There's not much here that measures quality or depth of learning. It really is just a checklist in the format of a rubric. At least looks like a rubric, but it's not. Then we talked about task-specific rubrics. They're useful for grading student work, intended to access recall and comprehension in their brains and what they've remembered about those things. Things about more fixed and distinct sets within their knowledge. Remembering and understanding facts and concepts as opposed to matching a description of performance quality. Task-specific rubrics are very good for just grading something and not necessarily providing a lot of feedback and not necessarily to grow from in their learning. General rubrics are the main type of rubric that we want to use for most assignments because they help students learn. General rubrics use criteria and descriptions of performance. We've talked in detail about that generalize across different tasks. That's why they're called general rubrics. These tasks all have to be activities of the same learning outcome. The criteria point to aspects of the learning outcome and not to features of one specific task. We want our criteria to measure multiple aspects of the objective that we're measuring. The descriptions of performance are general, so students learn general qualities and not task-specific features, and they are general so that students can submit differing types of assignments to or submissions in order to demonstrate their learning. And then we talked about proficiency-based rubrics, and again, these are not necessarily for everybody, but proficiency-based rubrics are aligned with standards-based grading, and that would typically be a school-wide or department-wide or that type of setup, and those scales are set up from the beginning in order to describe progress in terms of achievement of that standard. Proficiency-based rubrics document student performance in terms of proficiency level on a standard. And so these would be more like state standardized tests, basing your assessments all towards those types of tests and so on. And so most schools don't use these. So as we go through this list and as you create your assignment types, you need to determine what type of rubric would be best for however you are assessing your students with the assignment type that you choose.